Thanks for coming. Tonight we're going to talk about the draft zoning ordinance. A lot of what we're going to talk about is still conceptual. Nothing is etched in stone. This is not tablets that have been handed down from any mountain. This is your opportunity to give us feedback on the concepts that we're talking about, so that as we move through the summer, we'll have some more public meetings, and I'll go over that towards the end. And then in the fall, we will have the public hearing draft available. So we're trying to get to the end of the process. This is when we need your input to make sure that we're headed in the right direction, as well as to help us. Some of the questions we're going to ask, and there's a survey that I hope you all picked up, some of the questions we're going to ask, we only do a zoning ordinance once every 25 years or so. So it's not the sort of thing that you change every other year. And that's why there are some bigger questions that we want to ask. The answers don't really matter as much as knowing the direction we want to head. And if we want to make significant changes in the policy direction that we've had for the last quarter of a century, now is the time to do it, because the policy direction that we take for the next quarter of a century will have a significant impact on the city. So where we are, how we got here, and again, at the end, we're going to have the staff is going to man the various stations. These are not exercises, and there's no time on it, so take as long with the boards and the staff as you need, but once you're done, we won't be coming back for any sort of a wrap-up presentation, so feel free to head out at that point. Zoning. This is, a dry topic. Zoning and planning are not the same thing. Both attempt to take a very long-term view, but zoning is very much constrained by the legal principles that have existed, as well as the Code of Virginia. So it is much more detailed, a much drier type of thing, but the virtue of zoning is that it's absolutely enforceable. In planning, we can plan for anything, but that doesn't mean we can actually make it happen. Zoning, it's enforceable, and it's the sort of thing that does happen, will happen, and it has a great it's a great contributor to making a community great as we move forward. So our current zoning ordinance is, as I mentioned, we do this about every 25, 30 years. Our current zoning ordinance adopted in 1992, and since that time we have adopted two major plans. Plan Norfolk 2030 we adopted in March of 2013, and then in December of last year, Vision 2100 was adopted. These plans set the stage for the long-term vision for the city, and quite frankly, our current zoning ordinance does not implement those plans very well. That's a significant reason for why we're going through this process of redoing the zoning ordinances, because we need a 21st century zoning ordinance that implements the plans that have been adopted. Issues that didn't exist in 1992, sea level rise, the amount of flooding that we're seeing, these were not major components of the 92 ordinance. They will be major components of the 2017 ordinance. Contextually, we're growing. We are a growing city. We expect that we may reach somewhere around 300,000 by the year 2100. That's a number that we've actually been at in the past. In the 60s, we were also at that range. But while we're going to grow in population, our land area isn't going to grow, and as most of you know, the city is pretty well completely developed at one time or another over its 400-year history. So the development and growth is going to take place in a manner of either developing in an infill fashion or on property that has previously been developed and is going to be redeveloped. So what's changed since 1992? Well, just about everything. In 1992, this iPhone that I can't live without, in fact I have to have two of them, didn't exist. There are so many other things that didn't exist. The Motor Trend Car of the Year was a Cadillac that got 16 miles to the gallon, and everybody thought that was a really cool thing in 1992. So lots of things have changed. The thing that hasn't changed really much is our zoning ordinance, and quite frankly, we need to update it. So let's talk about the rewrite, and we're going to start with what's not going to change and what's not in the rewrite. So what's not going to change is the majority of the city is not going to be significantly impacted by this, this ordinance. Why? Because it's already developed. The pattern that is there is a reasonable pattern for out through most of the city. And one of the things that you're going to hear about as we talk through this is that that pattern, reasonable as it is what we are going to focus on trying to protect and preserve in the years and decades moving forward. The 34% of the city is in single-family detached zoning. For the most part, while the names of the zoning districts are going to change, for the most part, the rules that apply are not going to change in any significant way. I'll talk a little bit about the form standards here in a bit. That's the major change. And again, getting back to that, the purpose of form is to make sure that the character of our community is protected and preserved in the years and decades ahead. There are certain districts that we have that we're not touching. And the reason for that is that we think of these districts as belonging to the communities to which they apply. So all of the PCOs, the downtown, or the historic zoning districts, the downtown area, those districts have been worked out with a great deal of input from the communities and the specific neighborhoods to which they apply, and those are not being proposed to change other than from the standpoint of some numbering and that kind of thing as to where they fit within the ordinance. Finally, most of our processes are going to remain the same. The goal is to be less process-oriented and more outcome-oriented. That is easy to say and much harder for us to accomplish, but particularly through something like zoning, which tends to be very process-oriented. But we're going to try to focus on outcomes more than process. But we're still going to have the Planning Commission, we're still going to have the Board of Zoning Appeals, we're still going to have the Architectural Review Board, still going to have the Wetlands Board. I think we're still going to have City Council, the rules notice. One thing that is going to change is some terminology. The biggest piece of terminology is going to change is the term special exception is going to be, we're going to call it a conditional use permit, which is exactly what it says exactly what it is, which is it provides conditions under which a use can be permitted in a specific location for a specific reason. There's some things that we're just not going to address. And why are we not going to address them? It's because we don't know enough about them right now to know how we're going to be impacted or when we're going to be impacted. So we know that Amazon is working on how to do deliveries with drones, and if that means fewer UPS and FedEx trucks traveling the streets of the subdivisions, that might be a good thing, and it might not be a good thing. We don't really know, and we don't know how prevalent it's going to be, how soon. We know that autonomous vehicles, driverless cars, are going to be, they're already out there. We know that they are going to be a factor in our community. But if I gather 12 people into a room, there's at least 14 different ideas of how they're going to impact the community. From there's going to be fewer trips to there are going to be more trips to nobody's going to own a car, that they'll all be done as some sort of a ride share. All of those are probably really good ideas that people can back up, but not a one of them am I willing to hang our hat on and design a zoning ordinance around and do things like reduce the amount of parking needed and that sort of thing at this point in time. There will come a time where we'll have to address it, but that time we don't believe is this year. So the sharing economy is another big issue that we are not really addressing for the most part. The idea of ride sharing and bike sharing and those kinds of things, we don't prevent them, but neither do we specifically facilitate them. One area where we are talking about how to deal with, because it truly is a land use issue, is house sharing, or the Airbnb phenomenon, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. So we started off this process about 3 years ago, and we had 5 themes. We were going to, and quite honestly, we had a consultant help us develop the themes, and they're a little on the dense side. Over time, as we've worked with the consultant, as we worked with our staff, as we've worked with our citizens and the advisory committee that has been set up, we decided that the themes needed to be refined a little bit. And so now, instead of 5 themes, we have 8, and they're a little bit different, and I hope a little bit less, or a little bit more plain English and more understandable as to what it is that the goal is. One of the things that I'd like to mention here, and I'll talk about it again a little bit later on, while it's not a theme, it certainly is a basic construct of the ordinance as we've developed it, which is that we are going to try to use the market to help us affect the change we're looking for. You know, it's a basic premise that if you want more of something, you make it easy, and if you want less of something, you make it hard. And that's the kind of logic train that has been applied throughout the ordinance. And so we want to make sure that the market zoning has never been successful when it tries to run counter to the flow of the market. You know, the issue with Airbnb right now is a perfect example of the market is pushing out a product that in theory is not permitted in the city, and we have a very, very difficult time controlling for that. So the idea is, let's use the market in our favor. So again, while not a theme, it is one of the basic constructs that underlies all the themes. So if you don't mind, we're going to go through the themes one at a time and try to explain really quickly what they are, and then we'll get on to your questions and comments. So, neighborhood character. It's all about context sensitivity. I mentioned before that for the most part, our neighborhoods have a really good form and they have a really good character. And so part of what zoning should do is protect those forms and protect that character that make our communities and our neighborhoods special. If every community turns out looking like every other, or if every neighborhood turns out looking like every other neighborhood, that's not, that doesn't create diversity, and it doesn't create something that's special within our city. And currently we have that kind of diversity and that kind of special character to our neighborhoods, and we believe that and through the Vision 2100 process, we were told by the citizens that that's critically important to what makes Norfolk a special place. Mention at this point, when we say neighborhood character, we have developed 4 character districts. Those have been adopted several years ago. Those character districts make sure that we aren't applying one-size-fits-all requirements throughout the city. There's a little map in the back where you can see it. It's also available online, of course. And so a lot of what we talk about in protecting neighborhood character, the character districts the 4 character districts are going to help inform how that's done. And so in each one of the 4 character districts, there are going to be slightly different rules and regulations that apply to the neighborhoods within those character districts. We also have developed a couple of neighborhood resilience overlays. Again, you can learn more about that in the back. The first overlay is one that allows neighborhoods, after the ordinance is adopted, to come back and do something like what Huntersville recently did, which is create a unique set of standards that apply to that neighborhood and that truly protect that neighborhood from encroachment from outside, as well as from inappropriate development taking place within it. And then the second is a resilience overlay or really 2 resilience overlays, where we're trying to use the market to incentivize building in those communities that are going to be more resilient over time, um, and, um, and using different, more resilient construction techniques in those communities that look to be a little bit less resilient, or shall we say a little bit more at risk from being in a rising water environment over time. The focus, I've talked about form a lot, and the focus is on form, and it's not design and it's not architecture. Form is, at its basic level, is talking about things like setbacks and side yards and rear yards, but it also talks about finding those things that contribute to the neighborhood. So, for example, many of our traditional neighborhoods, every single house you see on the street has a front porch. And if it doesn't have a front porch, it has a fairly expansive front stoop. So that is a form element, to have a front porch. It's not a design that says how it has to be built. It's just a form element that a front porch needs to be provided. Does it need to be in the center? No. Can it be on the side and extend to the front? Yes. Are there any number of ways that talented designers and architects can find to do it? Absolutely. But so it's saying that if in a traditional neighborhood a form standard says there needs to be a front porch, it's a front porch, it doesn't tell you how to do it, it just says that it needs to be there. First floor elevations. If you look around the city, you'll find, particularly in traditional neighborhoods, that before the benefit of building codes and planners and planning and zoning, these neighborhoods were built, and the level of the land was raised above the street, and then the houses were built anywhere from 18 to 36 inches above ground elevation, because they realized that houses done that way don't get wet. It didn't require a planner to tell them to do that. That was the natural, organic way in which many of these neighborhoods developed. So that's another one of the things that's part of the form, is having the first floor at somewhere between 16 and 24, 32 inches above the grade, because if you take a look at the street, you'll find that the houses are built up, and they have a couple of steps up to get to often the front porch, which then leads to the house. So those are the kinds of things we talk about in form. It also means having windows. It means having garages that are either detached, which would be the most appropriate in our traditional neighborhoods, because those neighborhoods were built prior to the advent of everybody owning an automobile, much less 2 or 3 automobiles. And so those kinds of form elements are part of the concept. But it doesn't just apply to houses. It also applies to commercial buildings and non-residential, in terms of how they relate to the character of within the character district in which they're located. And so this will also talk about the window treatments and things like that. A lot of it goes back to the concept of eyes on the street. So the more windows you have facing out, the more opportunity there is for people to look out and see out, as well as people to be able, from outside, to be able to see in. And every single study that's ever been done shows that that creates a safer community for people to live, to walk, and to work. We also are talking about increasing the diversity of uses and the diversity of housing. Part of the concept is to expand infill options, and particularly in the coastal residential district, which is here in Ocean View. We look at East Beach, and there are 2 things that are going on in East Beach that are part of East Beach, which have been exceedingly successful. One of which is a mansion apartment, which is an apartment that actually looks like a single-family home, and for all intents and purposes kind of acts like a single-family home, but it is actually a multi-unit dwelling. And the other is the use of accessory dwelling units. Now in East Beach, they're called carriage houses, but they can also be known as mother-in-law suites, and we believe that this is an opportunity for infill to occur to accommodate the growth that we've talked about that the city needs to be able to accommodate without changing the character of neighborhood or changing the form of the buildings that exist within neighborhoods. We're also trying to suggest ways in which home occupations can be dealt with in a more proactive sense, and including building live-work units, but also allowing for a broader range of home occupations. Whenever I give a presentation like this, I have to point out that Apple Computer, which I think as of last week is the highest capitalized corporation in the world, started in a garage in a residential neighborhood. So, you know, the idea that people start things in their garage and have home occupations is not the sort of thing that is going to destroy the character of our community. In fact, it will enhance it and enhances economic opportunity. And we believe in a way that makes sense reasonably, but this is one of the areas where we are hoping to hear from y'all and your position. Streamlining processes, I said before, we'd like to be more outcome-oriented and less process-oriented. Part of what we are proposing is to establish a clear performance standard for each and every use in the city. Those would apply to uses that are newly approved as well as retroactively to uses that already exist. And by establishing these thresholds, then some of the process that is currently required might be able to be eliminated, and these businesses or these land uses be able to be brought more quickly to market. This would require more administrative approvals and a greater attention to detail by the planning staff, but less of the public hearing approach that we currently see. Setting clear expectations is part of the performance standards, and it's part of the idea of streamlining everything. I tend to liken this to having a baseball game and it follows a rule book. And every baseball game follows the same rule book. And everybody knows what the rules are every single game. That doesn't mean that different umpires don't have different strike zones. So while there's the general same expectation, there is a recognition that different situations may result in slightly different outcomes. And that's what we're trying to do here. Again, trying to avoid the one-size-fits-all mentality, while at the same time providing clear rules, clear guidelines, so that people understand when they walk in the door what the expectations are and know that if they meet those expectations, they will receive approval. Part of that falls on us. We need to be more proactive in having meetings, in helping guide people through the process, and so we're trying to front load as much as possible the kinds of information sessions and conversations with applicants rather than have them coming only after something is in the public realm. We also want to make absolutely certain through our processes that things that are going to happen and impact neighborhoods are going to get reviewed by, or at least talked about by, the civic leagues that are impacted before they start coming up out of the ground to the extent we possibly can. It's all about having no surprises. No surprises for you, the citizens, no surprises for the applicants, no surprises for the folks who serve on the Planning Commission or City Council. It's all about, can we set the rules in such a way that people understand what they are and then are able to move forward more quickly with getting approval of their concept. Or figure out very quickly that what they want to do is not going to work in Norfolk and maybe they need to look someplace else, or look someplace else in Norfolk at a more appropriately zoned piece of property. Resilience, flooding. These are two words that I think you've heard a lot of over the last 3 to 5 years because they are an increasingly large issue for the city of Norfolk. We set out with the goal of creating the most resilient zoning ordinance anywhere in America. And when you set out a goal of creating the most anything, it means that there aren't any patterns to follow and nobody's blazed that territory before you. And that's really exciting stuff, and it's also really scary stuff. So we've been working really hard on this. This is the area we probably have spent the most time trying to work with our consultants, our staff, fellow planners in other cities that are also in rising water environments to try to come up with how can we be the most resilient coastal city in America. And the zoning ordinance is part of it, but there's other things that are also part of it that we're working on. So we're going to work on reducing the flood risk. Not only are we going to require people in flood zones to elevate the houses to freeboard, to base flood elevation plus 3 feet of freeboard, we're going to require that throughout most of the city, that the first floor elevations of residential and in many cases commercial buildings be elevated anywhere from 1 to 3 feet above the highest adjacent grade. Why? Because it just makes sense to do so. You know, Hurricane Matthew came through last year. Over 2/3 of the damage in the city of Norfolk occurred outside of the special flood hazard area. This is not punishing people. This is taking a wise precautionary approach to being in a rising water environment, that these things are not going to, the amount of sea level rise and the amount of water inundation isn't going to diminish over time. It's only going to increase. And so another one of the basic constructs that we started the ordinance with is that pretty much every building we build here in the city should be designed, located, and built to be able to last at least 100 years. And that means putting it into place where it's less in harm's way. So that's part of our risk reduction. The other thing is we are going to establish for the first time in the city that every single property in the city during development has to design the property to retain the first 1.25 inches of rainfall right there on the property. You know, the old concept is that you take the raindrop and you shed it off the property as quickly as possible into a storm drain, into a pipe, and then you forget it because, you know, it's in the pipe. Well, the problem is in a rising water environment, the end of the pipe is underwater. So there's no place for the water to go, except it just becomes a storage cistern with a finite volume, and when that finite volume is reached, it just starts overflowing. And that's what begins to cause the flooding in areas that are not in the FEMA designated special flood hazard areas. It's the backup of stormwater. So if we can capture and treat the raindrop as close to where it falls as possible, it is a benefit to every person who lives and owns property in the city of Norfolk. And if you capture the rain in a way that it's useful to you, it's a benefit to you as well. I know because we capture all the rain at our house, and when it doesn't rain enough, I hear about it from she who must be obeyed, that she doesn't have enough water in her rain barrels to water her flowers and plants in the garden. So, you know, that is a useful product that we are asking people to capture and retain their rain. In addition, parking requirements, landscaping requirements, open space standards are all going to be hinged around how much of a sponge are they able to create for us to soak up the rain as it falls and not, in fact, shed it off, put it into a storm drain, and put it into a pipe. That's the new paradigm in the city. We're also proposing to create a resilience quotient, which is to say that in addition to capturing the first 1.25 inches of rainwater, and in addition to building the buildings at a height that is less susceptible to being flooded, we're going to require that every single new construction in the city achieve a certain resilience quotient based on the size of the building, the density, the number of units, and as the size goes up and the number of units goes up, the number of points required will also go up. And it's a point-based system where there will be many different options for the developer, the builder, the owner to choose which ones work better. And they'll have to meet a certain number of points. How they choose to meet those number of points, with the exception of retaining the first 1.25 inches and having the building foundation raised above ground level. How they choose to get those points will entirely be on them. And in some cases, we believe that there may be some market forces that can come into play that will incentivize doing things that would be particularly helpful in the energy efficiency and risk mitigation areas. Environmental sustainability. You're beginning to get a theme here. We're all about being as green as we can, which is an absolute requirement in a city where we know that we have to turn from being extraordinarily impervious into a sponge. Just like we have with the resilience quotient, we're going to have tables within the ordinance that give options for how people can meet minimum requirements, but there are going to be minimum requirements that have to be met. And in many cases, this is going to be more of a challenge to developers, to owners than it has been. But the goal is to expand the tree canopy and enhance our water quality as well as our water quantity management. People talk about, well, how does enhancing the tree canopy help with our stormwater requirements? Well, aside from the fact that trees soak up water, when the canopy exists and the raindrops fall, the leaves break the velocity of the raindrop, and so it turns the water from coming down quite as fast and hard, and it's the velocity with which raindrops hit that has a great determination about erosion. So to the extent that we can improve the street canopy, we can also decrease the amount of soil erosion that's occurring throughout the city. Flexibility. I hope you've heard me use that word several times already. We want to be entrepreneurial to the extent we can. Yeah, we like cat cafes. We had the first one open today. The only thing that I don't like about it is, for whatever reason, the pilot can't help itself with all of these incredibly bad puns in writing about it. But it is what it is. We're thrilled to be able to be a city where people want to do this kind of thing, because that's what contributes to the vibrancy of a place, is the fact that there are things that people are willing to do and willing to try. I don't know how many of you traveled out of state, but there's a rather famous bumper sticker that says, "Keep Austin weird," and that's about Austin, Texas, because those are the kinds of vibrant things that make a really great city. And we want Norfolk, we believe we are already a really great city, and we want Norfolk to continue to be a really great city. But as flexible as we want to be, it all comes back to the local context. As I said, flexibility, but within the context of the neighborhood, within the context of the development in which it is being placed. A certain amount of flexibility is a good thing. Too much flexibility is not a good thing, and the hard thing is finding the line that divides those two. But one of the things we are talking about is we have, some of you may have heard that we have this narrow lot process, which is the bane of existence to some developers and very much appreciated by others. But we are trying to find a way to provide a little bit of extra regulatory flexibility in the process so that if you are at 49 feet, it doesn't necessarily throw you right into the category of having to go through an extra process. Where 50 foot is the standard, 1 foot difference probably is not noticeable to anybody walking along the street, except perhaps a surveyor who's actually drawn the line. So those are the kinds of regulatory flexibility we're trying to build into the system. Quite frankly, it makes it a lot easier for us if we don't have to process a lot of special permits. And it makes it much easier and faster for developers, and it's a much more collegial environment. Finally, expanding economic opportunity. I mentioned over and over again early that the market is, no zoning has ever been successful in foiling the market. Market forces, that invisible hand of Adam Smith, always seems to win out in the end, and we need to recognize that in our zoning. And so that's part of what we are talking about. Again, it gets back to setting the expectations, and if somebody meets those expectations, hand them the permit and let them move on. Do not try to stand in their way. We don't necessarily want to stand in their way, and we want to provide the opportunity, as I mentioned, for people to grow, to start and grow, and be entrepreneurial. We believe that this ordinance overall is going to enhance the property values of the city. And one of the things that we want the market to try to do is to incentivize the redevelopment of some of our troublesome uses. So those of you who know about East Little Creek and know that we had a prevalence of what I think one former planning commissioner referred to as cars and bars. One of the concepts is if you provide in your ordinance the flexibility to do more valuable land uses, then that land will become too valuable to only be used for cars and bars, and we may be able to incentivize in that manner, moving away from the uses and the things that we don't want into the things we do want. Again, making it easy to do the things we want, making it hard to do the things that we don't want. One of our recent, we hope, successes is the Huntersville Plan Book, which is an opportunity to develop in a particular neighborhood in particular styles, with the city participating as a partner in the process to make the process move quickly and inexpensively for those who would do development. On the other hand, for it to be quick and inexpensive, it also requires construction to a certain standard, which has been established with the willing participation, enthusiastically willing participation of the Huntersville community. Our next steps, we have 3 more of these meetings. They're all going to be more or less the same. If you want to come to any or all of them, feel free. But if you feel like you've been bored enough by me once, and once is enough, then you won't hurt my feelings if you don't feel the need to come back. We're going to finalize after we hear your comments and synthesize through those. And by the way, we're going to take all of the comments that we received tonight. They will be cataloged. That catalog will be posted on the city's website. It will be on the zonenorfolk.com as well as on the planning site, so that you can see every comment that we've received, and we will respond to every comment that we have received. And if you made the comment and you look at the response and you say, huh, you missed the point entirely, there's contact information. Pick up the phone, send us an email, let us know that we didn't hear you right, because it's really, really important for us to hear you. That's what these meetings are all about. We're here to listen to you, which is why I have the back of the rooms telling me to be quiet, and so that we can begin listening to y'all. So we'll have draft ordinance late next month, and we're going to do some topical and area-specific work sessions in July and August. So, for example, we're going to come right back here in, I have it right here, if I can only find it. We're going to come right back on the 13th of July. We're going to be at the East Ocean View Rec Center, and we're going to talk very specifically about the residential coastal zoning classification, which is a new residential zoning classification specifically for the coastal character district, which is pretty much Ocean View. So we'll be back talking about that. We'll probably also have a meeting specific to downtown. But then we're also going to do topical workshops. So we'll talk about residential zoning in general. We'll talk about commercial zoning in general. We'll talk about landscaping and the environmental things. We'll have a topical session on the resilience quotient. So those are the meetings that we're going to have to do deeper dive, drill downs into specific topics. Tonight it's more of the 30,000 foot view. We're talking the forest. These topicals is when we're going to start talking about the trees and the weeds. And then we'll get into property-specific information sessions in September, which are the seeds and the roots. And then finally, we have a joint public hearing tentatively scheduled for October 17th, a joint public hearing with City Council and the Planning Commission. And of course, that date is not locked in yet. We won't know until we're through more of the process and we've heard more from y'all as to whether or not we're anywhere near where we need to be with respect to the draft ordinance. We're hoping to adopt by the end of the year, and because zoning is such a big change, our plan is also to have it adopted, but then have a rolling effective date. So approximately 3 months after it's adopted, it would become fully effective. In the intervening 3 months, projects that were already in the works under the old zoning ordinance, or what's now the current zoning ordinance, could be continued through the current zoning ordinance, or projects could be brought in under the new zoning ordinance. Of course, it's a one or the other. You don't get to pick, well, I want to do 3 things from the old and 4 things from the new. The mix and match doesn't work, but we will try to have a phase-in period of time so that we don't create any discord in the market. So, stations around the room. There's a zoning overview and draft zoning map, and right over here. And we have several staff people prepared to talk to you about that. We have neighborhood and economic resiliency, which is no, it's back there, isn't it? Oh, okay, it's back here. And then we have coastal resiliency and environmental sustainability, which is directly in the back. Each of the stations is a little different. What we want to do is we want to capture any of your thoughts, your comments, your questions. If we can answer the question tonight, we will. If we can't, we will write it down and we will answer it for you. But once we write it down and answer it for you, we'll post it so that it's answered for everyone who chooses to take a look. We also will ask you to, if you walk out of here tonight and driving home, you say, oh, I wish I had asked this, or, I really, needed to have said something about that. Here's the contact information. Please send the stuff. We want to hear from you. So with that, I'm going to end our presentation. So thanks, everyone, and I'm around if you have any questions of me.